Alright, so this is going to be our video going over electron configuration. So our electron configuration is going to be the ordered distribution of electrons in an atom. So basically that's just a fancy way of saying that electron configuration is the way for us to keep track of all of our electrons that we have. And one of the biggest things that we have to kind of pay attention to is going to be what we call Aufbau's principle. And what that means is that we have to fill the orbitals from lower energy to higher energy. So whenever we have our atom, we're going to want to fill those lower energy levels first before moving on to our higher energy levels. So we're going to build from bottom to top, from low to high. All right, so what we have is going to be our periodic table. And so how we're going to essentially read this is going to be like a book. So with a book, we're always going to start at the beginning. And so we're always going to start at row 1. And so this is going to be our row 1, row 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. So there are going to be 7 energy levels. We are always going to start at row 1. And how we're going to read this is going to be from left to right. So what we have are going to be our different blocks. Right, so the first block that we need to pay attention to is going to be our S block. And so our S block is going to be this one right here. This is going to be our S block. This middle area is going to be called our D block. To the far right, this is going to be our P block. And then down here at the very bottom is going to be our F block. So these are going to be the 4 different blocks that you need to memorize. So the S, D, P, and F. These you have to memorize in order to do electron configuration. All right, so we're going to read from left to right. So we're always going to start at the very beginning. So we're going to start at row 1, and we're going to read left to right. And what we're going to essentially do is that we're going to fill up going from lowest to highest. So let's go ahead. We'll take a look at some examples. All right, so we're going to look at the electron configuration for hydrogen. So as always, we're going to start at the beginning. So we're going to start at row 1 right here. So what we're going to write is it'll be row 1. This right here is going to be our S block. So we get our 1s. And then we're just going to count the number of electrons it takes to get to our element that we want, in this case, hydrogen. So we have 1. So we get our 1s, 1. And that is going to be the electron configuration for hydrogen. So, kind of breaking this down a little more. Right. Our first number, this is going to be our row number. So our 1 will be our row number. Our letter is going to be our block that we are in. And then our superscript is going to be the number of electrons it takes to get to the element that we need. Right, so kind of taking a look at this and going a little bit just kind of deeper into it. So let me go ahead, erase this. All right, so if we take a look at our S block, our S block is only able to hold 2 electrons before we have to move on to our next row. So like at row 2, our S block can still only hold 2 electrons. Now, if we take a look at our P block over here, all right, it is able to hold 6 electrons. our D block in the middle, it is able to hold 10 electrons. And then our F block right down here at the bottom is able to hold 14. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. So each of our blocks can only hold a certain number of electrons in it. And so we have to take that into account whenever doing electron configuration. All right, so let's go ahead, let's take a look at another example. So let's take a look at HE. All right, so as always, we're gonna start at the beginning. So we're gonna start at row 1. Oops, sorry, my bad. So we're starting at row 1 right here. We're going to have our 1, so row 1. We are entering into that S block. And it's going to take 1, read all the way over 2. So it's going to take 2 electrons to get to our helium. And so our electron configuration is going to be our 1s2. All right, moving on to our next one. So let's say we have our Li. Right, we always start at the beginning. So we're going to start in row 1. So we have our row 1. We enter into that S block, and it is able to hold our 2 electrons. Now, once we get to the end of a row, you can kind of think of that as the end of a sentence. And so once you're at the end of the sentence, you just move on to the next one. So we're going to move on down to row 2. So moving on down to row 2, we're still going to go into our S block, and it only takes 1 electron to get to our Li. And so our electron configuration for Li is 1s2, 2s1. All right, let's go ahead. We'll take a look at our electron configuration for Be. So same idea. We're going to start at row 1. We're going to read from left to right. So row 1, we're in our S block. 1, 2. So we get our 1s2. Move on down to our next row. So now we are in row 2. We enter into our S block, and it takes 2 electrons. And those 2 electrons get us to Be, to our beryllium, so we are finished with our electron configuration. All right, now let's go ahead and we are going to go to Fe. All right, so as always, we start at row 1. So we get our 1. We enter into our S block, and it is able to hold 2 electrons. So we get our 1s2. Move on down to our next row. We are now in row 2. We enter into our S block. It is able to hold 2 electrons. We continue reading all the way over. We are still in row 2. So still in row 2. But this time we are going to be entering into our P block. And our P block is able to hold 6 electrons. So we get our 2p6. We're at the end of our sentence, at the end of our row. We move on to the next. So now we are in row 3. We enter into our S block, and it's able to hold 2 electrons. Continue reading all the way over. We are still in row 3. We are entering into our P block, and it is able to hold our 6 electrons. We're at the end of that row. We move on to the next. So we are now in row 4. We enter into our S block, and our S block is able to hold our 2 electrons. So we get our 4s2. All right, now, this is going to be where it gets a little bit weird. Whenever we are entering into our D block, we are going to drop our row number by 1. So instead of this being 4D, it is actually going to be 3D. So going into our D block, we drop down our row number by 1. So we're going to get our 3D, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we get our 3D6. And that is going to be our electron configuration for Fe. All right, so those are going to be the examples that this is going to cover. We are going to go back and cover the other examples when I get back in class, so that we're able to make sure that we're all on the same page with this. Now, one thing I do want you to be very aware of is that you are going to have to physically write out these electron configurations. So for your test, the Unit 2 test is going to be on paper. So you are going to have to write these out. So just kind of keep that in mind, that there is going to be no just randomly getting out of this. You're going to have to do it.